council to help our citizens with a minimum of following Kenton Tukwila by having tenant rights outreach material on the website and available in the office for people so that they can have a sense of what steps they need to take to contact the city and what types of problems the city can help them with. What I'd love to see us do a little more proactive and take a look at what Seattle has done. I was on the Association of Washington Cities Housing Committee, and Seattle really has taken the lead on helping renters in the city of Seattle. And a resident of Burien called me before this meeting tonight and asked if we passed any ordinance that was recommended or was mentioned on page 229, that if we could consider the just cause eviction ordinance. Right now the landlord can ask a tenant to leave with just 20-day notice with no cause. And so it gives renters not much leverage to keep their homes, and if they pay their rent on time, it's a huge burden.
Councilmember Keene.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm still trying to figure out if there is a problem, and I would think that if there's a problem, we could certainly fix it in a reactive mode, as we've done in the past, as we did with the Juanita Apartments. I do not want to become Seattle. I do not want to become a nanny city. I don't see what the things that Seattle has. I don't know. I just don't want to go down that path. I do agree that to make the information more available vis-a-vis on the internet, on our website, I would like to see pamphlets here in the library, at our community center, as well as along in City Hall, where people can find them. But I think we're treading on very thin ice on some of these other proposals that other cities do, and I just don't want to see us to go down there.
Any further comments? I do have some difficulty with the fact that Burien is rental friendly when we're looking at Laurel Lake and assessing how many apartment units we had in Burien. A population of, I think we have 15,000 overall housing units, more than 6,000 are apartments. So we do have a very active apartment community, and we serve these folks because we do have reasonable rents. I don't know that the city could afford, out of our budget, offering relocation services that Seattle does. Seattle has a very much smaller apartment population compared to their single families. It just seems like it would be an ongoing burden on our resources to do much more than we've been doing in the past. I think we could look at some of the information and see if we couldn't customize it so that our residents would be more clearly informed, and maybe look at doing it in several languages so we could get the information out. Councilmember Clark.
Was it Des Moines that charges if something about $100 fee? Can you go through that real quickly?
Yes, that's they inspect units every 2 years, and that's the exterior to the units, and that's to look for safety issues. They look at lighting or whether there's decks that are loose, that sort of thing.
And that's mandatory?
Yes.
And then that fee supports the staff necessary to implement that? That's a question.
In theory, yes.
In theory. I am really not in favor of that here in the midst of a recession. I just don't think it's a good road to go down right now to do something like that. when we are cutting existing programs and take on a new expense. I do agree with making information available. And after the first of the year, when we are looking at our work program and all, I would like to take a look at the crime-free multifamily that we have, which I know is a voluntary program, but the questions I have around that do not involve this issue.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Keene asked an important question. And we have a track record. We keep a log of code enforcement violations, requests, etc. I have to admit, I have not reviewed that in the last 30 days, so we do have a record. Are there a disproportionate number of people who have complaints related to poorly maintained apartments or any issue around that specifically?
I don't have exact numbers for you, but I did talk with our code enforcement officer. He estimates that less than 5% of the calls that he responds to are about this issue. He thinks that every month or every 2 months he might get one of these, and we try to be very responsive to this. They're generally, he was quick to point out, he said, you know, there are often two sides to this, and I'm not advocating for one or the other, but this is our code enforcement officer talking, and he said these things, the ones that we get called on at least, often involve tenant-landlord disputes. I know that since I've been here, I've been around the periphery of this. He pointed out that something that I had forgotten, and that is that there are certain life safety issues that have to do with water, electricity, broken windows, anything like that that is a life issue that has to be fixed immediately and has to be responded to. That's not negotiable. And so those things are present. And generally, I can remember one where a resident felt like the water temperature wasn't sufficient, and we get those occasionally. But this is by no means the bulk. It doesn't even begin to approach the calls that we get on a regular basis.
So when
Less than 5%.
Less than 5%. So when we follow up on an issue, have we had satisfactory response? If there's a legitimate issue, for example, the reason we closed the apartments successfully was because of serious violations of electrical, water heater installations, etc., that didn't comply with code.
And I can't claim knowledge of every single one that comes through. I know that these are very, very difficult to deal with sometimes for all kinds of reasons. We don't leave them alone. If there's a problem there, it's not getting fixed, we do pursue it. And Jim estimated that in 80-90% of the cases you can get to some conclusion. People don't like being bothered by the city. So if you go in there and say, look, you got to fix that window, or you got to provide heat, or they generally do it to avoid the hassle of dealing with us. It's very rare that somebody digs in and says, no, we're not going to do that. Sue us. Take us to court. And that generally, almost in very, very few cases, has gotten to that so far. I think the area that is perplexing in our city that we do see something that we're working on is with our immigrant population, who is often concerned about drawing attention to themselves for any kind of reason. We saw that in some apartments that were recently renovated up on Ambom. Very, very bad conditions, just deplorable in my opinion. And many of these folks were concerned about calling attention to the fact that they may not have been residents. There were lots of reasons they were afraid of, the police or something else that they may not have understood. And that tends to be a more intractable problem in my experience here in Burien.
I tend to agree with you, and I think there is a fear factor that plays into this. So do we have the Landlord-Tenant Act pamphlet available at City Hall?
Yes.
And in the community center and in the library?
We'll double check. I was just talking with Jen about that, and we have it upstairs. We're going to be putting a rack right down here by the elevator in the not too distant future. It looks like the one that the library has right there. And we'll make sure that it's there, and we'll make sure that it's on our web. I'm not sure whether it is now or not. But we'll make sure that it's prominently posted and that information is available in multiple languages as we can afford it.
Right. I was just going to ask, is it available in Spanish? And if not?
It isn't now, to the best of my knowledge. We are, as you know, we're translating documents.
Correct.
And, so we're working on those sorts of things.
Well, I also support as much information as possible to help people work through some of the issues that Councilmember Krakowiak and all of us are concerned about. And so I support the idea of having information available on the website, a link to this kind of information, and have it available if possible in Spanish. So I do not, at this point, agree with adopting the Seattle protection ordinances. I am, however, very interested in reviewing, as Councilmember Clark proposed, our crime-free multifamily housing. I remember when we discussed that at length when I was on the council several years ago, and we supported it, and I thought it was a more proactive ordinance. So I would appreciate having that brought back for a good discussion. I think it's a very proactive, affirmative way to help maintain civility and good conditions in our apartments throughout the city. So thank you.
Councilmember Kukoviac.
I want to thank everyone for this great discussion and the support for hopefully customizing the Tenant Landlord Act to Burien to give people a tool and information on how to help themselves with the building conditions. The 5% of the citizen action requests through the code enforcement just deal with building conditions, and I hope that in the future that we will revisit the rental agreement regulation ordinance and the just cause eviction ordinance to help renters with items that wouldn't be covered under the building conditions. And then the city doesn't have the funds to do the assistance ordinance and the conversion ordinance, but taking a look at the rental agreement regulation ordinance and the just cause eviction ordinance in the future will help people to feel like their apartments are their homes. Thank you.
So we're done with the business agenda.